Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on low-carbon urban transport. This is the third event of the World Bank Knowledge Sharing Series on low-carbon and climate-smart cities, a joint initiative of the World Bank Global Practices of Urban, Disaster, Risk Management, Resilience and Land, Environment and the Natural Resources, and Transport. My name is Victor Mulas. I am the team lead of the Tokyo Development Learning Center, or TDLC for short. TDLC is a partnership between the World Bank and the government of Japan that serves as a global hub of Japanese and global urban development knowledge and expertise for practical operationalization. In today's event, we have an exciting lineup of speakers and topics, showcasing good and emerging practices, policy measures, and institutional frameworks, together with the role of the private sector in achieving climate-smart urban transport. But before we begin, please let me make a few of housekeeping announcements. First of all, this webinar offers English and Japanese simultaneous interpretation. The first session will be in English and the second one in Japanese. Please select the language of your choice by clicking the interpretation tool, which is the globe icon on the tool menu of Zoom. Second, throughout the webinar, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat space. We will have a Q&A session at the end of each presentation. Please feel free to post your questions in either Japanese or English. The TDLC chat master will bring your question to the speaker and the moderator. And finally, please note that this event will be recorded, and the recordings will be available on TDLC website after the event. Now, let's get started with today's program. Today, we're very grateful to have Benedict Ibergern to provide the opening remarks for this event. Ben is the practice manager of the Transport East Asia and Pacific region of the World Bank. Please allow me to invite Ben. Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Victor, very much. Thank you. You pronounce my name pretty well, Ben Ibergern, so appreciate that. It's always a tongue breaker. So not making it easy for people, but thank you, nice words. And thank you all for joining this knowledge sharing series on low carbon and climate smart cities. I think this is the third event of the series, and today we will be discussing how low carbon initiatives and climate smart urban transport practices can foster greener and more sustainable cities. The purpose of this knowledge sharing series is to share practical experiences and emerging trends from Japan and other countries on the development of low carbon and climate smart cities, and hold an open conversation between practitioners from urban, environmental and transport background, and a wider audience of civil leaders, private sector partners and other stakeholders. So this event leverages the unique expertise through the collaboration between World Bank's three core groups. And I'm very proud about that we can come together here. Urban, Disaster and Risk Management, Resilience and Land, and the acronym is URL. The Global Practice and Environment, Natural Resources and Blue Economy, ENB. And then, of course, where I come from, the Global Practice and Transport Global Practice. Transport Global Practice. And I'm representing East Asia and Pacific as the practice manager for that reason. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the government of Japan through the efforts of the World Bank Tokyo Development Learning Center program that have made this event possible. Thank you again. I would also like to extend my great appreciation to all the speakers here today. We have a very rich kind of lineup of speakers, including a senior researcher from the Tokyo Research Institute, as well as our dear World Bank colleagues and experts leading projects in my region of East Asia and Pacific. So let me point out a few facts here. Transportation is the fastest growing consumer of fossil fuels and the fastest growing source of CO2 emissions, contributing roughly 25% of the global CO2 emissions from fuel combustion. And with the rapid urbanization in developing countries, energy consumption and CO2 emissions by urban transport are increasing very, very swiftly. The effects of the climate change are widespread, including rising sea levels, changing rainfall patterns, heat waves, and extreme high temperatures and other extreme weather events. As per the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that report you all know, these climate change effects will vary greatly in different parts of the world and likely to be stronger in developing countries. Both geography and lack of resources to adapt make them more vulnerable. The reduction of GHG emissions has become a priority on international and many national agendas. For transport to contribute to minimizing emissions, the system needs to be more sustainable and drive low carbon initiatives. For this, short and long-term measures are needed, which include reduced trips, model shifts due to behavioral change, uptake of improved vehicle and engine performance technologies, low carbon fuels, investments in related infrastructure, and changes in built environment. It's urgent for developed nations to focus on intensively reducing their emissions, while developing nations should aim at making faster progress proactively to manage and limit the increase of emissions. While national level strategies that foster energy efficiency, low carbon technologies and fuels are important, but that will not be sufficient to achieve the necessary emissions reductions without the local policies. It needs to go hand in hand. The rate of urbanization, pace of development, spatial forms, and distribution of urban activities all have a significant impact on the demand for transport, thus on transport energy. Proactively managing these attributes remains a challenge, but can foster sustainability, mitigate climate change effects. I really hope that our participants can take advantage of this wonderful learning opportunity to reflect on the challenges of your own cities and the opportunities to apply these solutions to your projects. I hope you can do this. You can take advantage of this wonderful learning opportunity. Thank you, and back to you, Victor. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ben, for opening this event and for welcoming our participants. Now we move to our first session, Climate Smart Urban Transport, where our World Bank colleagues will discuss the cases from Indonesia and China. The two cases will provide practical examples of how low carbon city agenda is fostered through climate smart public transport. The moderator of this session is Jin-On Oh, or Jen, who is lead transport specialist at the bank. I would like now to invite Jen to the stage to introduce our first session and our speakers. For our Japanese speaking audience, the first section will be in English. Once again, please select Japanese in the interpretation tool, which is the globe mark in the Zoom menu. Without further ado, Jen, over to you.
Thank you, Victor, and thank you everyone for participating in this event. So as mentioned, East Asia is home for growing cities, and these increasingly richer cities also experience rapid motorization and congestion. And in addressing the transport mobility problems and also to achieve the climate-friendly urban development, the World Bank team has been working in several cities in the region to tackle their problems. And I'm very delighted to introduce our two speakers to talk about how we are working with our client cities in achieving the green mobility. So first, I turn to Ms. Nupur Gupta, who is our Senior Urban Transport Specialist, who will talk about how mass transit development is supporting sustainable transport in Indonesian cities. Over to you, Nupur.
Thank you, Jen. Let me just share my screen.
While you do this, just a quick word of reminder, please feel free to share your questions on the chat box while the presentation is being made, and we will discuss after the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I want to share with you today about the Indonesian Mass Transit Program Support Project that the World Bank is preparing with the government of Indonesia, which we think has the potential to begin to unlock the many constraints that are hampering urban mobility in Indonesia. Some of you may already be aware how acute congestion is debilitating the mobility in Indonesian cities. Public transport barely exists and is mostly in the form of unorganized minivans or angkots, and there is a proliferation of two-wheelers and acute dependence on personal modes of transport. And this is leading to congestion and the kinds of problems that we see associated with this high level of motorization and congestion, which is air quality issues, road safety issues, health impacts, greenhouse gas emissions, and all of them adding to the growth potential and competitiveness of the cities. Now, Indonesia is really a big country by most standards. There's about 265 million people, and more than 50% of those reside in urban areas. Almost 60% of the GDP of the country derives from these urban areas. About 14 cities by the last count were in the million plus category, and there were another 12 in the 500,000 to 1 million category. So this is really quite a large country. And our urbanization flagship report for Indonesia highlighted how the congestion and other issues were hampering the growth potential, and effectively 1% urbanization growth was leading to only a 4% increase in GDP compared to other East Asian giants like China, where the impacts were to the order of 10%. So already Indonesia is beginning to feel the impacts of congestion and other urban area issues. This is, as I had mentioned, because public transport is really at rock bottom, with 1 to 12% type of public transport mode shares, and really personal modes beginning to gain an unbalanced proportion of the mobility in these cities. If you really look at some of the other Asian cities like Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo, Shanghai, they're still far ahead in terms of the public transport. I mean, from 60 to 90% that we see in Hong Kong, Mumbai, Singapore, to or Seoul to the levels of 20 to 30% in the Chinese cities. This is really at a stage where it's on its way out, and this is really quite a serious concern for all of us in the urban mobility sector. And this rapid motorization that we see is effectively what is leading to growing greenhouse gas emissions in Indonesia. Transport is already at 25% of the energy emissions, at about almost 150 million tons of CO2. And most of it, a large part of it is driven by this passenger mobility and this acute dependence on personal modes. Indonesia is at about 55 cars per 1,000 people and about a little over 400 two-wheelers per 1,000 people. And imagine what happens when it goes to 100 cars, which is where China is, or 900 cars, which is where US is. And we're already in a very transport gridlocked situation. So it's really a nexus of the planning, institutional, and funding gaps that are leading to this kind of situation. Way back in 2000, the government decentralized the urban mobility responsibility to the subnational levels. And owing to these gaps and the fact that they are the technical capacity and the fiscal capacity is really not there to be able to support a strong urban mobility agenda or investments in mass transit projects, which are required in almost all of these cities. We have seen very little growth in the last 20 years on the urban mobility agenda. Perhaps Jakarta is the only city where most of the transport investments have been focused so far. If you look at the budgets of all of these cities, perhaps Jakarta is the only city which could afford an LRT system. Most of the other cities may not be able to afford even a BRT mass rapid transit system. In addition, because of the regulatory framework, although there are large metropolitan urban agglomerations, so cities which are contiguous in terms of their geographic boundaries, there are not frameworks which exist which allow for collaborative or integrated planning or implementation of projects. So we see the kinds of skewed results where Jakarta has to stop the metro system right at the boundary of the Jakarta city and not go beyond into the larger metropolitan area. The national efforts have been limited because of the decentralization, and whatever efforts there have been require enactment of presidential regulations to justify an investment in mass transit, or their other efforts have really not generally been very effective. And this all brings us to the need for a national mass transit program, which can assure a more effective and structured approach to supporting mass transit systems in Indonesian cities, and also encouraging the subnational governments to begin to plan and conceive and implement projects in a more integrated way in their metropolitan areas. It was in this backdrop that the bank, really with the help of its own trust fund, started to dialogue intensively with the government of Indonesia and in particular the planning body Bappenas and the Ministry of Transport to start discussing an Indonesian mass transit program, and the contours of this have broadly been drummed out. The first big victory coming out of this dialogue has been really the announcement in the National Medium-Term Development Plan of the Government of Indonesia 2020-2024 of urban mobility being identified as a national priority, and the target of having mass rapid transit systems in 6 cities, which are Jakarta, Surabaya, Bandung, Medan, Semarang, and Makassar. Just quickly on the IMTP, which is the mass transit program conceived at the national level, the main contours are to keep the basic ownership and responsibility at the city level. So it's the urban area and the subnational government which really proposes projects for support. The national government supports through capital expenditure support. Currently, this is limited and the government can only extend in-kind support for road-based mass transit systems, and to also provide support on technical capacity building, which is severely needed. The subnational government would have the responsibility for operating and maintaining the system and managing any deficits that accrue during the operating phase. There is a strong emphasis on leveraging private sector efficiencies by pushing for a structured contracting, gross cost contracting modality, where demand risks are taken over by the public sector, which is the good practice followed around the world, but very little evidence of it other than in Jakarta is available in the other Indonesian cities, and really to start to develop good practices and a systematic approach to approving these projects based on good scientific methods of alternatives analysis, mobility planning, et cetera, so that they meet the criteria for a national assistance program. So these in a nutshell is what IMTP is about and under discussion. And
we are running out of time, so could you try to wrap up in a couple of minutes? Thank you.
Sure, thank you. And so the IMTP support project, which the bank is supporting, is about a $324 million project, and it focuses substantially on a large institutional and capacity development agenda and the delivery of 2 demonstration mass rapid transit projects, one in Bandung and the other in Medan. Both of these are bus rapid transit systems. This is really the phase 1 of the national program that is being conceived. Some of the good things that we will see is really the delivery of a national assistance program, the capacity at the national and at the subnational levels to deliver programs, but also projects and manage them effectively. The Medan project is a BRT project, about 18 kilometers, very good demand and robust economic viability. This is a little bit more. Bandung is almost a 9 to 10 million size metropolitan area, 3rd largest metropolitan area in Indonesia. And we're again looking at a 19-kilometer BRT system running through the city center. Again, a good project which can begin to transform the mobility in that city. There are a number of good practices which have been incorporated into these projects so that the users begin to start seeing a real transformation in mobility. And our agenda of trying to shift, the modal shift agenda, can really be recognized, and good practices in terms of proper access improvements, which is one of the big issues that have been highlighted by users and especially women, demand management strategies, TOD, ANCOT reorganization and mainstreaming, integration with other systems, and electric mobility. This is something which is high on the agenda of the Indonesian government, and we are supporting them. We're looking to incorporate this into our 2 projects. And these are very preliminary greenhouse gas emission saving estimates that we prepared. They are conservative, they are really localized to the 2 corridors. And, but the takeaway is that there are big savings possible. With electric mobility, these savings can be increased almost to the extent of 35%. So that's really very powerful and worth taking forward. And the more important point really is that with these 2 cities and the demonstration impact, the institutional development and capacity enhancement that this project will bring, there is the potential for huge scale up from 2 cities to the 6 cities that are part of the RPJMN, and then the next 10 cities. And the expansion of this agenda within the cities beyond the mass transit corridors. So really, we are seeing a potential and a possibility to a greener future for Indonesian cities, and perhaps switching to a low carbon trajectory for mobility. And with that, I will stop. Thank you. Questions are welcome.
Thank you very much, Nupur. Sorry to cut you short on this very interesting topic. Really impressive how we are approaching in a very comprehensive manner, both at the national level, building the institutional framework and thinking about sustainable financing, at the same time also supporting the actual investment into specific infrastructure. So please have your questions and comments coming on the chat box. I will aggregate them and discuss after the second presentation. Switching the gear, so while we think about the planning and funding and developing mass transit corridors and modal shift, also important pillar of decarbonizing, creating low carbon transport is also electrification. So we now change the scene to China, one of the most advanced cities in China in terms of their effort to electrify their public transport fleet, Shenzhen. And I'll invite Ms. Jin Wang, my colleague, who is a transport specialist, to talk about the Shenzhen's experience and what lessons we can learn from. Jin, you have 10 minutes. You are still muted.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you. I will share my screen. Okay. You can see the screen, right?
It's showing a little bit odd. I don't know if it's just me. Can you do full screen, please? Yeah.
Is that good? Okay.
Yes,
okay.
it's good.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great honor and pleasure to share our recent studies on the electrification of public transport. This is a brand new report, and the launch event was held last Friday. And if you're interested in this report after this presentation, I will provide the download link, so you can feel free to download and find more information in the report. So actions to combat climate change and its impacts are on the urgent agenda for all countries. So the transport sector, which accounts for around 1/5 of global carbon emissions, has always been the focus of decarbonization. From the figure, we can see in terms of the transport modes, 74% of global transport emissions come from the road vehicles, which account for 80% of the rise in emissions from 1970 to 2010. The transport sector is facing a major transformation. Technology plays an important role in decarbonizing the transport sector as part of the global climate change mitigation efforts. An example is electric vehicles, which offer a viable option in reducing emissions from road transport as the world shifts towards a low carbon grid. The recent research estimates that the electrification of the global vehicle fleet of public transport buses will comprise about 30% of the projected emission reduction in transport by 2050. So electrifying public transport is therefore a development priority, particularly for developing countries. However, owing to higher capital costs, various gasoline or diesel alternatives, rapid evolution of product technology, limited operational experience, the adoption of electric buses has been slow worldwide. So China has achieved large-scale electrification of urban buses, processing 98% of global electric bus inventory, and the charging infrastructure for electric buses is well developed as well. So a star example is in Shenzhen, which became the first city globally to have fully electrified bus fleet in 2017. That is Texas 2 years later. So the Shenzhen case offers not only the operational feasibility of the electrification of public transport, but also the experience of utilizing the electrification to improve operation and service provision. Today, I will briefly share the Shenzhen's experience towards electrification of public transport. So again, if you're interested, more details were in the report. So since a lot of people may not know the Shenzhen, so a brief introduction where the Shenzhen is. So Shenzhen is located in China, southeast province of Guangdong, adjacent to Hong Kong. Shenzhen has a mild and warm climate, a relatively flat topography, where the electric vehicles tend to perform in a more reliable way than in the cold and hilly areas. More importantly, Shenzhen is one of the most affluent cities in China, a young city rising after China economic reform and opening up with overall high quality infrastructure. And almost complete the supply chain locally from the battery production and vehicle manufacture to battery recycling companies, and more importantly, is the headquarters of the manufacturer BYD. So Shenzhen Bus Group is one of the 3 major bus operators in Shenzhen, was the first public transport operator in China and the world to electrify its entire fleet. Shenzhen Bus Group operates nearly 6,000 e-buses, running 1/3 of the city's bus routes, carrying 40% of bus passengers trips in Shenzhen. So the Shenzhen Bus Group electrified its whole bus fleet from 2009 to 2017. From this figure, you can see in 3 phases. So the first phase is a demonstration stage in 2009 to 2011, followed by a small pilots from 2012 to 2015, and a large-scale electrification from 2016 to 2017. So in 2017, the whole bus fleet was e-buses. So this was certainly not a transition without its challenge. How the Shenzhen Bus Company Bus Group dealt with them and what the financial and environmental impacts are could provide important lessons for public transport operators around the world on the similar path. So I'm happy to share the main findings from our studies. So for the main findings we have there, today I want to briefly introduce 5 main findings we found through this case study. So the first one is a coordination and collaboration. So as we all know, one of the main challenges of urban mobility in Chinese cities is the lack of cross-agency communication and coordination. Departments within the same municipal government are often reluctant to share information and sometimes compete for resources with overlapping responsibilities. So unlike the traditional bus companies, bus manufacturers and gas stations who dealt with major products and clear supply chains, the e-buses was new with unclear roles and responsibilities among players. With more sectors and players involved, the transition to public transport requires an even wider scale of coordination and policy synergy. So as you can see from the figure, so national and local government provide purchase subsidies to the e-buses manufacturer, and the Shenzhen local government also provided a subsidy for bus operating companies and the charging station companies. In this way, the government departments relieve the financial burden for all its industry partners on the business chain. Lifetime warranty and battery change offered by the manufacturer in accordance with negotiation and contracts helped ease the bus operating companies on the uncertainty of the technology. The charging companies take care of the construction and operation of the bus charging stations, will also facilitate the bus operating companies' smooth transition from traditional buses to e-buses. So the second finding I want to share is that from the technology point of view. So the Shenzhen Bus Group has established a technology department whose major mandate is to facilitate the technology selection adoption. On account of very limited bus depot space and scarce charging facilities available, Shenzhen Bus Group chose a large battery e-buses with a long-running distance to minimize the charging need and disruption to the operation. With an average daily operation distance of 190 kilometers, the buses could run a whole day and would only need recharging at night for most routes. So over the 10 years period, the Shenzhen Bus Company and the manufacturing worked together to improve the technology and optimize the weight configuration based on the operation feedback and create a more mature and standard product. And also the Shenzhen chose the DC faster charging as opposite to AC slow charging. So this is to ensure the operational efficiency. So the third findings I want to share is for the business model, how Shenzhen bus group did. So the key challenge for the e-buses adoption around the world is its high capital cost. Even with the sizable national and the local government subsidies, the purchase cost of the e-buses is still much higher than the conventional buses. So Shenzhen Bus Company, the bus group, introduced a financial leasing model that uses a financial leasing company that purchase and own the vehicles and lease them to the Shenzhen Bus Group for a period of 8 years, with a life cycle warranty for key parts offered by the bus manufacturers. So the Shenzhen Bus Group takes the ownership of the vehicle after the leasing period is over. The batteries are returned to the manufacturer to recycle and dispose, while the bus body is sent for recycling. Since the leasing period equal to the total life of the bus, this arrangement turned out the high cost procurement into the more manageable annual rental and lease payment. So the charging facilities, including charging stations and transformers, are owned by the owners of the depots, who can be the Shenzhen Bus Group or a charging service provider, where the government owns the power supply lines. This arrangement turned out to be a common model followed in China and has a healthy and competitive market for charging service providers, including the participation of great companies. Based on this whole vehicle leasing financing, Shenzhen Bus Group established a viable model where players with different specializations are responsible for the business of their own expertise while bearing the risk where they are in the best position to manage.
Jin, sorry, we need to wrap up very soon. Could you try to bring this to close in 2 minutes? Sure. Thank you.
So the first we want to share is high-tech knowledge with the advanced public transport system and the training. So you can see from the picture, so Shenzhen Bus Group do the upgrading their digital systems. Also, they have their 3 systems were integrated to inform their intelligent transport center, including bus operation management system, safety management system, and repair and charging management system. And also for their training, they train all the staff and without laying off any single employee. So the last I want to share is the benefits. So for the Shenzhen Bus Group, for the total cost of the ownership, compare the diesel buses and the e-buses will be much lower than the diesel buses. And also the charging stations is much can break even in about 5 years. And also for the pollution side, environmental side, so e-buses has much less emission than the conventional buses. So this case study of the electrification of public transport provides us an opportunity to achieve multiple objectives, including low carbon urban development, reduction of local air pollution, creation of jobs, and higher acceptance of public transport by residents. However, going to higher capital cost various diesel alternatives, the rapid evolution of product technologies, so the adoption of e-buses have been slow worldwide. So, but Shenzhen is a unique case for electrification, even in China. Like we just mentioned, Shenzhen has a mild and warm climate and is one of the most rich cities in China. Furthermore, Shenzhen municipal government is financially and institutionally capable, where it can afford a very generous fiscal subsidies. The government has been famous for its policy innovation and innovation, given Shenzhen's special economic zone status. Despite its unique advantages that most other cities might not have, this case study on the electrification of bus and taxis still provide other cities and bus operating companies with a series of useful lessons, especially on the practical implementation details, as well as a valuable accounting of financial and environmental impacts of the e-buses using real-life data. Hope this report can start the dialogue among the cities and the countries and facilitate sharing the practical and useful lessons for many other cities. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very impressive experience of Shenzhen. And this report, I read it, and it's very comprehensive and useful. So hope others can also benefit from it.
Sorry, download link is here, Jane.
Yes. Yeah, so audience, if you're interested, please refer to this full report that Jen introduced today. So I don't know if there are any questions. I see one in the chat box. So to all both presenters, how do we shift personal transport mode like automobile and motorcycle to mass transit system? Any specific measures to achieve this modal shift? So I don't know if there are any other questions asked in Japanese. Please, facilitators, help us translate any other questions. In the meantime, let's hear from the presenters your response to this question. Nupur?
So it's once people move to personal modes, it of course becomes hard. But this is what we work on, is to improve the value proposition of moving to public transport. If you are on a heavily congested corridor and can navigate it much faster on public transport compared to personal modes, then that is the value proposition that we would like to offer by giving priority to public transport, making travel faster on public transport so that it makes sense, and not just offering attractive and convenient public transport, but also complementing it with demand management strategies. So if we have a well-designed public transport system and well-serviced public transport system along the corridor, then you want to make sure that you're optimizing its use and you are limiting the availability of parking or allowance of vehicles along that corridor. So those are some of the strategies which would need to be adopted to give primacy to public transport. And I mean, they're very good examples we see from Latin America and other parts of the world of this having happened, where we had up to 17% people on personal modes move to the Transmilenio Bogota. In India as well, we've seen 11% people move from personal modes to the BRT in Hubli, Dharwad, and other places. So there are a number of examples which show when you implement and offer a good service, it's possible to have people move. It would not happen to the extent of 100%, but certainly those shifts are possible and they are very valuable from a green and overall sustainability perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. So provide the options at the same time, provide negative incentives for private mode of transport. Jin, maybe I'll ask you a slightly different formulation of this question. So while Shenzhen is, making this very comprehensive effort to electrify transport, what did the city also do to make a modal shift more towards the bus system?
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, thank you for the question. So for Shenzhen's case, Shenzhen with the electrification of their public transport whole fleet, at that time the ridership of the bus is go down. And then in 2017, however, when the bus group upgrade and the electrification of their whole fleet, so they witnessed a ridership increase of 2.4%. So the ridership start to increase, and until 2019, until the COVID-19 outbreak. So we don't know how much this increase was because of the electrification of the buses, but Shenzhen, I think the other factors like Shenzhen also introduced on-demand services for their, as well as more flexible routes to connect suburban communities and metro stations about the same time, and also change the long distance buses to the feeder buses, to more connected to the metro lines. So I think all these options make the best transfers, seamless transfers with metro. With the other mode, will more help there to shift from the automobile to the buses. Thank you.
Thank you for this. There's one last question. Do we have time to address this question? This is a question about the stakeholders like bus operators and drivers. I think it's for Shenzhen. And as we shift to the electric fleet, were there any impact on the abilities to impact on the workers, their abilities, whether they could make through the transition? That's how I understand. Another question was the related to fares, whether the government or World Bank support was provided to keep the fare for mass transit system as low as possible. So I think those two questions, I think we are running really short of time. So if you could be brief in your responses. So first question to Jin and the second one to Nupur. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Because there's time limit, I really in short sentences. So for Shenzhen case, just I mentioned, like Shenzhen Bus Group provides very comprehensive and well-planned training for all staff, including drivers, maintenance staff, also the operation manager, everybody. So there's no single layoff, no single employee layoff. So everybody, they got the full training. So they are, e-bus is really different with conventional buses. For example, the brake may take, because heavier with the battery, so it may take a long time to brake, a long distance to brake. But with a full training plan, I think they make a very success in this employee transition. Thank you.
Very quickly, so fares are really a policy matter for individual governments. We advise on what would be a sustainable path. We also advise governments on what could be the right strategies, how to find, if they are inclined to have low fares, how to finance those deficits so that the service does not get affected. So, but we don't directly fund subsidies as you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you for these reactions, and thanks a lot for all of you for paying attention to these presenters and asking questions. I wish you had more time to discuss further, but until the next opportunity. Over to you, Victor.
Thank you very much, Nupur and Jim, for sharing these insightful cases with us today. So now we shift our focus on the Japanese case. In Tokyo, one of the ways of achieving low carbon agenda is through sustainable transport, including improvising on the concepts of transit-oriented development for greener, cleaner, and sustainable cities. The private rail development company, Tokyu Corporation, is taking measures in this direction, and we would like to hear more about this from Mr. Masafumi Ota, who is a senior research fellow at Tokyo Research Institute. The moderator of this session is Shige Sakaki, senior transport specialist at the bank. This session will be conducted in Japanese language, so if you need to turn the translation onto English, please do it now. And without further ado, I would like to invite Shige to introduce our next session. Shige, over to you.
Thank you, Victor. Now we'd like to move on to the second session. This session theme is in the railway transport company for the low carbon initiatives. As a moderator, I am the Shigeyuki Sakaki, the senior transport specialist at the World Bank. And for this session is also 30 minutes in length. And please ask questions if you have any questions at the end after the presentation. So let me introduce the speaker from Tokyo Research Institute, Mr. Masafumi Ota is a speaker today. He has worked in Tokyo for a long time. And before Mr. Ota's presentation, let me briefly explain about Tokyu from myself. About Tokyu. Tokyu Railway is a 100% private company, but they have worked on development of the 3,000 hectare real estate development has been done as well by Tokyu. And also they have worked on various initiatives. And in introducing about the Japanese initiatives, it is very important to think of Tokyu. So we really appreciate Tokyu's presence in Tokyo. Thank you. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Ota to start presentation for about 20 minutes or so. Thank you very much. Sorry, this is Ota speaking. So let me start the presentation. My internet environment may not be that great, but in TOD, and I'd like to talk about the structure by TOD. Next slide. Our purpose or the goal is strengthen our railway lines along our railway line. Ensen in Japanese is structured by TOD. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief self-introduction of myself. I've been working in Tokyu Corporation for a long time, and I was in London as well from 1992 to 1995, working in urban development as well as for the railways. Next slide. This is a pattern of TOD. Basically, we have the very high density business model of private railways and Garden City and then Toshi, or the cities. Ota-san, excuse me. You are perhaps injecting some noise. Your microphone is difficult to hear that. So can you please make sure to speak to the microphone, please, Ota-san? Because we have difficulty in hearing you. Now we can hear you.
大丈夫です。
So now, let me continue. So in case of Japan, in Japan, we have the stations and then we have the suburban surrounding area, which is an area of high density surrounding the train station. And then there'll be slideshow, please just proceed. We have the terminal stations, and then the railway will be laid out. And then our concept of the Ensen along the railway lines, basically, people live in the suburbs along this line of Tokyo, for example, and then commute to the central part of the city by railways. That's like the Garden City. Next slide. In case of Tokyo, from Tokyo, we have to the southwestern part, starting from Shibuya, then Toshi lines, and Tamaden and Toshi is connected to that, which is a big suburban city. And this is a picture of Shibuya. And we have a lot of high-rise buildings in Shibuya. And we have the urban revitalization, rejuvenation, and that those projects has been done for Shibuya. And because of that, in Shibuya, there are a lot of office spaces where people are working, a lot of people, office workers, work in these high-rise buildings in Shibuya. Ota-san, this is also Google Japan office is headquartered in Shibuya. I think it's difficult to hear your voice. Can't you hear me? he said he will change the earphone that he's using because we have difficulty in listening to his presentation in Japanese.
Sorry.
これはどうですか?
Okay, so maybe, is this better? Yes, I think it's much better.
Much better. お願いします。
はい。
Yes, please go ahead and restart. Now, please wait. So let me restart. This is the Futago Tamagawa, which is a suburban city. And we have the high-rise buildings like this. In front of the train station in Futago Tamagawa, we have a lot of high-rise buildings like these. We have offices, and it's a complex, combined development in the area surrounding the train station. And also, next slide. This is a farther suburb, more west from Tokyo, that is called Tama Plaza. This is a picture around 2010. As you go to more towards suburb, there will be more commercial facilities are abundant, meaning the shopping centers and so on. Next slide, please. Next. This is a train station called in close to the South Machida, Minami Machida. This is also the development project surrounding the train station in the suburb of Tokyo. And also, and this is the train station itself of Minami Machida Station. Next, please. Actually, before COVID-19, if you look at the picture or the drawings before COVID-19 on the top in the slide, then pre-COVID-19, people lived in the suburban area, utilizing various commercial facilities like shopping centers and so on, and lived there. However, today, a lot of people are now working at home. And as a railway company, they would shifting to make some of the working area, which is working from homes, are now going to become more common. So therefore, we are making the communities surrounding these suburban cities or train stations to make it more sustainable. And these type of structures, green path structures, are planned. Next slide, please.
This is what we call the green piece structure. Can you hear me? Well, I think we could hear you partially, but not entirely. Your voice is breaking. What about this? Well, then we have a lot of background noises, but kind of hear you. What about now? Well, background noises are still quite prominent. Well, allow me to continue. I apologize for this. So this was taken from our midterm management plan in the past. So this is the schematics around the station. We're trying to control the density, well, optimize the density in terms of the buildings, so as to build the compact city. Next page. And furthermore, this is the strategy for the wider area. So we will establish connection with other railway lines or connection with the neighboring stations. Or maybe we can cross over the jurisdictions, meaning that we need to implement quite a large-scale area management. Next page, please. So this is how it looks. So it looks like a lot of green peas in several pots. So the mobility would connect each other. And as we try to build sustainable community, we also try to target the carbon neutrality and circular economy. So this is quite very much relevant to the philosophy of ours as a railway company. Next page, please. So what does actually sustainability mean? And so this is our version of the answer to that question. The first, well, this is actually, I'm sharing my personal opinion about how I view the sustainability. So the criteria of the sustainable town would include, number one, resilient community of minimizing environmental load. And then guarantee moderate quality of life. In Japanese, we say it like a soko-soko. And then as for the economic growth, why not we settle with the moderate soko-soko economic growth? And then we would like to create the smart city utilizing the cutting-edge technology. Furthermore, we respect history and culture in the sustainable town. We are implementing various initiatives. This is the picture of our initiative campaign related to SDGs. At the Moto Sumiyoshi Station, we installed solar panels. And at the Tokyu Setagaya line, well, operation is fueled entirely by renewable energy. So this is the area where Setagaya line operates. So under the concept described earlier, we, as a railway company, trying to build a sustainable community or communities. Next page, please. So what is the sustainable Den Toshi TOD model? So from Shibuya, the centers are connected by railway lines. And then under the TOD model, there should be a very efficient mobility supported by a railway. And with the development of various centers, we would like to support such model. And then schemes of the area management are built to internalize external impacts around centers. And we would like to create the environment where innovations will be generated. And mobility and urban development should be in alignment. There should be a good, close coordinations between the two. And energy and food stuff should be produced and consumed locally. And we would like to make progress towards design-oriented town development with deep respect for history and culture. Next page, please. Yes, so what's in store for future? So this is the image of how our sort of axes are expanding and covering the wider area. So rather than expanding the geographic coverage, it is the image of the strengthening or enhancing the coordination and collaborations. So this indicates a pattern. So there's a station, and then in front of the station there's a vacant lot. And Tokyo's approach is that we upgrade the station, then we co-develop the area surrounding the station. So by implementing area management, we try to maximize internalize the external impact of sustainable development. And public-private partnership is quite crucial. And our thinking is that we would like to export our model to other parties, other places. Because such interactions or exchanges will enhance the value of the SDT model. So lessons and implications. First of all, the TOD is effective to promote sustainability of areas. And also, it is important to build area management platforms which allow other actors to various actors to participate. And then it is also important to strengthen so-called the green peas structure. And also, what we have to embark going forward is to connect different ensigns and different stations, different train lines, different local governments should be connected. And so through these initiatives, we would like to achieve various things. So this concludes my presentation. I apologize for the noises that made my presentation difficult to hear. Well, I think there was some connection problem, so we apologize for that.
Now I'd like to move on to Q&A. We have already 3 questions being asked. And please let me summarize these questions from myself. The first question is, in your example, if you could show us a specific example in the TOD model, that is the urban mobility to be how it's contribute to the urban mobility achievement. That is the first question. Excuse me. And the second question is, in Tokyo example, and the regional cities examples might be different in terms of public transport. Do we need to change public strategy? In Shibuya, it is difficult to apply the TOD to the regional cities in Japan. It may have to do, because from Shibuya it'd be quite different, so we may have to change the strategy. That is the third question. With the more gap widening in society and lot of less children and aging society like in Japan, you mentioned about social development like soko-soko. But what kind of things are you assuming? Because history and culture, but including the immigrants to Japan, the non-Japanese people, how are you going to think of inclusion of those people, including the non-Japanese people? So please. May I? And I can answer in Japanese, correct? For the first question, it's obviously with the railway company being conducting as a private company, that private in the daily lives, people started to use more of the public. I think we do have in Japan a lot of usage of the public transport already in Japan in the daily lives. That is the first point I'd like to mention. And for the second question, does the Shibuya applying that to the regional cities is quite difficult, I think, because the population is so different, but DX has been developed so much. We need to increase the population. We have started some initiatives in Shibuya. We are trying to link with some other regional cities outside of Tokyo, and so that the model in Shibuya can be spilled over to the other regional cities in Japan. That is what we are trying to do. The third point is further even more difficult question. You're talking about the diversity inclusion. And I think we need to create a communication platform for that purpose. In the past, we have worked on the area management organization focusing on the train station. But we do have such those rigid structure, but then we do also need to have some flexible structure of communication. So that's all. Thank you very much.
私の方から1点ほど。
I have a related question. In your presentation, you mentioned about area management. In some slides, you mentioned about area management. You just explained also about the platform. So the platform development could probably be part of the area management that you talked about. So more specifically, at Tokyu Railway, what kind of area management has been implemented? Can you give us some concrete examples? We have in Futagotama-gawa and Shibuya and also Tama Plaza, we have a solid area management structure. The community members and the local governments and also the businesses are involved. For example, in Futagotama-gawa, there is a department store called Takashimaya. However, I think they are only targeting the area very close in the proximity of the station. So they are quite rigid in their approach. So we're hoping that they could be more flexible in how they cover the area. So I would like all the actors to be more relaxed. I think the time has come to close this session. We heard and learned about the new initiatives, and also you mentioned about the future initiatives given the impact of the COVID-19. I think we can draw a lot of lessons for Japan as well as for other global cities. So thank you also for the questions. So with that, we would like to close this session. Then give the microphone back to Victor.
Thank you very much, Sige. Thank you very much, Ota-san, for showcasing this example from Japan, from Tokyo. And as Sige said, I think it's a good example that could be applicable. Many of the lessons and the thoughts that are here can be applicable to many of the challenges that our developing partners have. So now we move to wrap up our discussions, and I would like to invite Joanna Masick, lead urban specialist of the World Bank, to share some of her reflections on the discussions we have been having today. So now, please let me invite Joanna to come to the stage. Joanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Victor. Hi, everyone. A really fascinating session, and thanks to Victor, Ben, Nupur, Jin, Ota-san, Shige, and the TDLC team for this great session. It's a wonderful initiative to have this cross-sector look at low-carbon cities, and today looking at low-carbon transport. Ben started the session by talking about how transport has the fastest growing emissions. And we also heard from Nupur about how urbanization is driving increased demand for transport in countries such as Indonesia, but also broadly in South Asia and Africa. And it will see growing impacts on emissions, congestion, air pollution, which will all have a negative dampening on growth. And this requires a scaled approach to transport in cities. And we heard two very interesting cases, practical experiences from Indonesia and from Shenzhen in China. And I noted some sort of common issues that both the cases brought as sort of bottlenecks or challenges to the scaling up of low carbon urban transport. So both cases mentioned the fiscal constraints. In Indonesia, the conversation was around the lack of borrowing capacity of municipalities. In Shenzhen, it was around the financing gap and the need for subsidies to make the electrification of the bus fleet viable. The second area common to both was also the building the technology capacity and the system and management capacity for these changes. So designing the mass transit systems or right-sizing the technology of the electric vehicles. The third area mentioned in all of the cases was around the need for cross-municipal coordination, multi-stakeholder involvement, and also that national-local interaction, because these are complicated investments in cities that require coordination and financing beyond the city. And then finally, on the business model. So in the case of Shenzhen, it was about finding the leasing model, and in Indonesia, defining what type of system can the city afford, whether it's BRT and metro, and what is the business model for finding that. But obviously many benefits on scaling up transport. So I just wanted to also thank Ota-san for sharing the experience of Japan. Important to look not just at the transport investments, but the broader urban development and mobility. And he brought in the case of Japan, which is very well known now worldwide on how they've integrated urban and land use planning, transport and energy to create value around stations, both to create livability, functionality, resilience, sustainability, as he mentioned, this green P structure, but also to finance the transit system itself. So it's a model that Japan has shared with China, and we see increasing use of this TOD approach in China, and important for Indonesia too. And it would be great that we continue this kind of knowledge exchange between these three countries in particular, and across these sectors, urban, transport, land, environment, energy, to bring more opportunities for scaling up low carbon transport. So thanks again. Time has run out, and a really wonderful session, and thanks to all the organizers and participants. Look forward to more in the series. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Thank you for extracting some key lessons from our event, but also adding your closing reflections. So today we have learned about Japanese and other global good and emerging practices in urban transport and how this initiative contributes to the development of low carbon cities. Once again, I would like to thank our speakers and discussants for sharing their insights with us. With this, we conclude this event, but remember, this is just the third event of our knowledge sharing series on low carbon and climate smart cities. Please stay tuned for our future events as we continue to explore the path toward low carbon cities from a variety of angles. The next event of this series will focus on urban spatial forms for low carbon cities. We will have Japanese and international experts introducing the approaches and key elements of climate smart urban forms. This next event will take place on October 27th. And for more details, please visit our webpage, tdlc.org, that you have from the Tokyo Development Learning Center. So please stay tuned. And now let me finish with a big thank you to all of you, our participants, for joining us for this conversation. TDLC organizes events on a wide range of urban development topics. So if you are looking to learn more, please visit our website or follow our SNS channels in Facebook and Twitter. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you and goodbye.